The 1960s, an era of national metamorphosis. America's political and social landscape was evolving like never before. The historical notion of a white national identity was being swiftly dismantled under the Civil Rights Movement and the strident demand to repeal discriminatory policy. In order to cement its position as a global leader and foster a national identity, the U.S. had to powerfully reject that status quo, and fast. In a radical break from the past, the Immigration Act of 1965 eliminated the national origins quota and became the frontier for American multiculturalism. The quota, legalized in 1924, imposed numerical restrictions on immigration based on country representation in the 1890 census, when more than 70% of the American immigrant population came from only 3 Western European countries. The Act of 1965 thereby dismantled the legally and culturally enshrined nativist ideal of white American homogeneity and inaugurated an era of mass immigration from all parts of the globe, effectively transforming all aspects of American society. Conflict surrounding immigration in the United States was far from novel in the 20th century. Even prior to the birth of the country, thousands of immigrants were arriving from colonial Britain. Shortly after the United States declared its independence in 1776, the American Congress enacted a bill in 1790 permitting free, white immigrants who had resided in the United States for 2 years to become naturalized. In 1798, the Alien and Sedition Acts extended the naturalization period to 5 years. By the early 1800s, thousands of immigrants were arriving from Northern and Western Europe to the United States. But in the wake of such mass immigration, an aggressive nativist movement materialized among American-born peoples of European descent. The ideals of the nativist movement informed nationalist campaigns like Manifest Destiny, giving rise to the 1830 Indian Removal Act, and at the same time inflamed anti-immigrant sentiment. The nativist narrative molded American policy well into the 1800s, seeking to install restrictive legislation that would limit immigration. In 1882, the ratification of the Chinese Exclusion Act, which debarred Chinese laborers from immigrating to the United States, marked the most stringent policy to date. For the first time in the history of U.S. immigration, the act explicitly targeted an entire ethnic group. By 1890, the vast majority of the American immigrant population originated from Great Britain, Ireland, and Germany. America was, as had been envisioned, white. Ethnocentrism and nationalism were gradually becoming intertwined. To be American was to be white. American culture was, in the eyes of a nativist, white culture. In 1924, the United States enacted the Immigration Act of 1924, which imposed an annual national origins quota on American immigration. The quota enforced numerical limits on immigration to the United States based on national origin. Immigration was restricted to 2% of the source country's representation in the 1890 census, when the majority of immigrants were coming from Western Europe. Over 70% of visas were designated to migrants from Britain, Ireland, and Germany. With the quota greatly restricting immigration and catering primarily to immigrants from Western Europe, the United States became increasingly homogenized. The government had calcified a framework that would continue to preserve a primarily white America. The nativist ambition was seemingly actualized. But then, the 1960s, a culturally transformative period in American history. The social and political climate of the United States was rapidly modernizing as ideas encouraged by campaigns like the Civil Rights Movement and the Chicano movement permeated American society. As Americans sought to dismantle the discriminatory structures embedded throughout United States policy, a wave of activism for immigration reform emerged. In 1963, President John F. Kennedy submitted a bill to Congress which would abolish the national origins quota.
We are the descendants of 40 million people who left other countries to come here to the United States to build a new life.
The new bill would establish a preference for immigrants with specialized employment skills over national origin. 2 years later, the act hit the House and Senate floors. Co-sponsored by Representative Emanuel Seller and Senator Philip Hart, the act introduced a new legal framework that would eliminate the national origins quota and privilege highly skilled immigrants and family reunification for immigrants who already had family living in the United States. An annual immigration cap of 290,000 visas would be enforced, but the allocation of visas was equalized to 20,000 visas per country of origin in the Western Hemisphere. With the revocation of the quota, Nationality and ethnicity would no longer be the cornerstone for immigration into the United States. This contrasted significantly with the act installed in 1924, which had both greatly restricted visa distribution and had markedly prioritized immigration from Western European nations. Initially, the act was opposed by Republicans and Democrats alike, who desired heavily restricted immigration policy and feared diversification of the demography of the United States. Resistant legislators employed abrasive rhetoric, devaluing immigrants based on their source country's contribution to the United States. Senator Ervin notably stated, "With all due respect to Ethiopia, I don't know of any contributions that Ethiopia has made to the making of America." An adaptation of the bill which prioritized family reunification over employability appeased opposed legislators. Nobody is quite so apt to be of the same national origins of our present citizens as are members of their immediate families. In fall of 1965, the act garnered bipartisan support and passed in the House 318 to 95 votes. On October 3rd, Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Immigration Act into law. Johnson prematurely asserted,
"This bill that we will sign today is not a revolutionary bill. It does not affect the lives of millions."
Little did Johnson and the legislators who had supported family reunification in order to preserve the ethnic profile of the United States know that the act would open the floodgates for U.S. immigration and become the frontier for American multiculturalism.
We saw that after 1965, 50%, right, of immigrants that started to come in were Latino, about 25% were Asian. There's a growing amount of those from African countries, the national origins quota having been lifted. There's other countries who are seeing America as the way to be able to get a better life.
Within 30 years of the bill's ratification, 18 million immigrants entered the United States. Whereas Europeans and Canadians had represented well over 60% of the immigrant population in the 1950s, by the 1970s, the number plummeted to 22%. Immigrants from Asia, who had made up only 6% of annual immigration in the 1950s, soared to 35% of the immigrant population in the 1980s. Only 1 in 5 immigrants were coming from Europe. The number of permanent residents jumped from 300,000 in 1965 to 400,000 in 1973 after the bill's introduction. In the 1990s, the vast majority of immigrants came from Latin America, with 31% coming from Asia and only 16% coming from Europe. By 2000, over 30 million immigrants had settled in the United States. America was transforming, culturally, linguistically, politically. The influx of immigrants from all over the globe, enabled by the Immigration Act of 1965, was changing the very fabric of American society. Whereas early 20th century America had promoted the notion of a white dominion, this new, cosmopolitan society increasingly embraced ideological and cultural plurality. By 1997, 79% of elementary schools with a foreign language program offered Spanish, rather than historically prominent French or German. By 2013, around 20% of the American population spoke a language other than English, compared to around 11% in 1980. Organizations like the Association of Indians in America emerged in the aftermath of the Immigration Act, helping to preserve Native culture and promote integration into the United States. Immigrants have additionally become the backbone of certain sectors in the American workforce, making up nearly a quarter of the labor force in construction and 19% in manufacturing. In 2014, it was determined that 1 in 5 business owners were immigrants. Restaurants and businesses supplying food and products influenced by Native culture have flooded the American economy.
The value that we see, or the gift that they give to us, is through their culture, share their food, their love and passion, beauty we see in the music, the art, the restaurants, the grocery stores that have opened up as a result.
The Immigration Act of 1965 opened the door for a range of other substantive policy changes, such as the Refugee Act of 1980, which spared refugees from the annual immigration cap, the Immigration Act of 1990, which expanded the visa program and implemented the visa lottery system, and the 2012 Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals Act, or DACA, which protected minors who had arrived as undocumented immigrants to the United States. These significant legislative efforts have been mirrored in a much broader legislative movement to foster multiculturalism both locally and nationally in the United States. The Act of 65 was profoundly impactful on the makeup of American society. It was the leading edge of a multicultural frontier that now shapes and defines the American identity and much of the discourse in society today.